Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, and today is episode number 112. I'm a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur, founder of Laborless, which is an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for the immigration industry, and of course, which brings you this show. Today, on episode 112, I'm really excited to talk to an a lawyer who is also an entrepreneur and is actually doing both things, which frankly I wish I did too, but of course I don't practice anymore. Christian Frank Foss, who is an immigration lawyer and also the founder of a company called Virtualaw. So Virtua without an L at the end, Virtualaw, and Virtualaw is kind of a consultancy. It's a business that helps other law firms, mostly immigration lawyers, but other lawyers as well, use all sorts of tools that are available off the shelf to streamline and digitize their practices. So we're going to get into Christian's story, how he's been really a tech enthusiast kind of his whole life and his whole career, and how this all culminated into building this business to not take what he's done to streamline his firm and help others do the same. So before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, DocketWise. So for the immigration lawyers out there who have a case management system, if you don't know, DocketWise is an all-in-one case management system and platform. They have best-in-class immigration forms, really customizable questionnaires, industry-leading integrations. In my opinion, they were the first company to have open APIs. They integrate with my startup, Laborless, and others. Wonderful customer service. One of the things I really love about DocketWise is all the resources and content that they create for practitioners. So they have ebooks, a blog, a podcast, webinars. They support this show and many other things around the industry. So they really put their energy into supporting the industry. And so if you're interested in using DocketWise or checking them out for your firm, please check them out at www.docketwise.com or use the link in the show notes. And then, of course, you can tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So without further ado, Christian, thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to get into your story and chat with you.
Hey, Roman, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
It's going great. Thank you for being here. I mentioned in the intro that you still practice and you've built a business. I often think about that. I guess at the time I was tired a little bit of practicing law, although I only had done it for about 2 years. But I do miss it sometimes. So it's really cool that you still do both. And we're going to get into, maybe talking a little bit about how you've, continued to run your firm, how you do it virtually, and of course, how you've leveraged that for others. But I always love to start kind of in the beginning, if you will, with my guests. So you are from Puerto Rico. You were born in Puerto Rico and raised in Puerto Rico. Talk a little bit about that if you can. What was it like, for you growing up there, studies, school, etc.?
Well, let's start at the beginning. That's redundant. I was born and raised in Western Puerto Rico. There wasn't much around. My parents were entrepreneurs, and they built an orthopedic laboratory. It was called back then. And so I grew up around all sorts of customizing and engineering and parts, and I used to play and tinker around with pieces of metal and scrap and cardboard. And there wasn't much to do. So what I did is I took stuff apart, mostly killed it in the process, and got electrocuted very frequently.
Wow.
I took stuff apart and learned how to put it back together. I was a very inquisitive kid, which is a nice way of saying that I would ask why everything was how it was, and most people didn't have enough patience to tell me how things worked, so I figured it out by myself. But I was lucky enough to go to really nice schools, private schools in Puerto Rico, which also explains why my English sounds, I lost the Hispanic accent along the way, although I can fake it pretty well. My first language is Spanish. So I grew up around drills and tools of all sorts. So as I grew interested in electronics, there was a computer laboratory at my school. It used to be called labs back then, which was the only schoolroom that had air conditioning. And Western Puerto Rico is very hot and humid. So I would spend my lunch hour tinkering with Apple IIe's. This was the first computer I ever booted. And I was fascinated with the fact that I could tell it what to do and it would crunch numbers and data, in large quantities because I was math impaired. I am terrible at math. It must have been some sort of childhood trauma of trying to learn how to multiply at a very early age, but I sucked at it. But I started playing video games. Started with Prince of Persia, when you had to load 7 floppies for it to run, and this was around 1986. So this was second, third grade, and I fell in love with computers. Mind you, a computer back then was about 5, 6, 7 grand. So it was way out of the budget, but every day I would go to school and spend some time with the computer. And when I went back home, no interwebs back then. This was the time that
Right.
barely sending data over a fax was, brand new. I wanted to buy a computer, but I couldn't. So I started learning how to do BASIC, and my Santa Claus brought me an Atari 2600, right? And it came with BASIC. So I learned basic programming back then, and that's when I discovered that for programming, you needed to know math, which I sucked at. So there was no development for me. I progressed into reading how to take apart engines, right? I used to take the bus to Western Auto and spend my afternoons reading the mechanic manuals, the repair manuals for engines before I had a car. And halfway through high school, my dad passed away. And he left $7,000 of Social Security disability, right? Of those $7,000, my mother spent $5 grand on a computer, and that was
Wow.
$5 grand on a car and $2 grand on a computer. And I was like, wonderful. I have the opportunity to take them apart. So the first thing I did with both was disassemble them completely and screw them up.
Wow.
And attempt to put them back together. And I did. By the time I was 16, I was an auto mechanic. And my first car was a 73 Dodge Swinger. This is a muscle car, and I was really into cars. I've always been a gearhead. And I took that thing apart and put it back together so many times, and I had a lot of fun with it. Just to take it out to the racetrack and all that. I'm sorry?
I just looked it up. I've actually never seen a Dodge Swing. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, the
Wow, very
beautiful
nice.
car. It was
What color
awesome.
was it? Do you remember?
Yellow.
Yellow.
Her name was Daisy, and
Nice.
she had a 340 engine with a 4-barrel carburetor, and I took the whole thing apart and put it back together. a good
Wow.
10 times to take it out to the racetrack.
That's
Because
that's
that's what you do when you're 16, right?
and that's something us city kids. I grew up in New York City, and you don't have the space, you don't have the garage, we don't have the means to do that. So that sounds like such a blast.
It
But
was,
yeah,
but then again, it was Western Puerto Rico. There wasn't much around. The house was on a beachfront in the middle of a mangrove, of a palm plantation, if you will. But my nearest neighbor was a good 5 or 6 miles away, and there
Wow.
weren't any sidewalks. So owning a car, having a car, and keeping your car running was the key to freedom. And that's when I started being interested in telecommunications, and that's how it segued, because I was so far off and it was so remote. The only way to contact someone was over the telephone, and the nearest town long distance calls used to cost 59 cents a minute. So if you called a friend, it would be $3, for a few minutes of what are you doing this weekend? Where are we meeting? How are we hooking up? And that's when I became interested in phone phreaking, which is a type of hacking, right? If you've watched the movies Hackers, which is a seminal movie for all us computer tinkers, phone phreaking was part of the inception that telecommunications was built on. And that's how I started taking phones apart, learning how information, sound waves were transmitted over telephone lines. And I learned how to connect my computer to a telephone. That's when the modem came in. But ISPs weren't a thing yet. There was no way to connect to the internet. So I found a way to get my modem to connect to the local university's dial-up system, right?
Wow.
And I would dial all the extensions. I coded my modem so it would dial all the extensions, and then when it latched onto a modem, I could check to see if I could log in through Telnet. And eventually, I found a way to connect through Telnet to the university's administrative servers that allowed you to connect to the internet. This was 92, 93.
Wow.
And it became exponential after that. Multi-user dungeons is how MMORPGs used to be called back then. And these were textual Dungeons and Dragons, which I also played. It's a prerequisite of being a techie nerd. And and instead of spending my afternoons at Western Auto, I would spend my afternoons at Radio Shack and geek out on caller ID and touchtone phones. And then I was able to afford one, take it apart, and then I learned about DTMF modulation, which is how numbers used to dial. The little beep boop is a frequency. So by the time I am 17, 18, I was working as a mechanic. I enrolled in college right after high school. And that's when I discovered that computer engineering was a thing. But here's the thing. To be an engineer, you have to be good at math. Remember, I'm mathematically impaired, so there was no math around. So the next best thing was befriending engineers who were good at math and hanging out with them. We would go online through IRC, Internet Relay Chat. This was purely textual. The best web browser was called Gopher, and it was purely textual. There were no images yet. JPEGs, image compression weren't around yet. So you had to read matrix style, this endless array of letters, which comes in real handy with ChatGPT and LLMs now because it's the same interface. That's how I got started reading command line interface. So because I was out in the boondocks and connecting to the interwebs was nearly impossible, my internet was crazy slow. Even with a 56K modem, the fastest my modem would connect was 14,400. So this were with 14,400 bytes per second. So it was 7,700 on each way, right?
So what does that mean? Does that mean it takes a long time for information? Like you sent a message to somebody, by the time they receive it, X amount of time has passed?
Yes. So you have more or less an idea. A 4 megabyte MP3 would take 6 or 7 hours to download. Just one file. And multimedia was just being born. There were no CDRs. You couldn't rip a CD, not even images. This is just plain old music. And I was always a music fan. My brother is a musician. My stepfather was an opera singer. He studied in Spain, and I grew up around classical music. And I wanted to access libraries of music that I could download, which weren't available at Sam Goody, which was a local record store.
Oh, I remember Sam Goody.
Yeah, so I spent my nights at a friend's house, and he could connect at 56K to the University of Puerto Rico in Mayaguez's server, and that way we could download MP3s a little faster. We would have LAN parties. I still play StarCraft. I love StarCraft and Age of Empires. Those turn-based strategy games, I love them. which is build, 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 and then kick everyone's butt as best you can.
Right. Right.
And being able to connect quickly, connect to the internet was a hassle. You had to dial in, and then if anyone picked up the phone, the connection would disconnect. So the local cable company subcontracted from a company in California high-speed broadband. The download was through cable, but the upload was through telephone. So the cable modem would dial into the phone, request the data, and then it would high-speed download it. So I signed up immediately because my telephone sucked, but the cable was pretty good. Mind you, this was 1998. So cable TV made it to my home around 98.
Wow.
It was the end of the line. So I subscribed to the company. It was called Pegasus Cable TV back then, the cable provider. And I signed up for the service. It cost $59 a month, which was a buttload of money for an ISP back then. But it offered 128K connection. And that was 10 times as fast as I could. So that first night, I downloaded 4 gigs worth of MP3s. And I was ecstatic. But the modem was a little off, right? It would reset the connection, and downloads could not be resumed back then. You couldn't reattach the connection to whatever socket, they're called sockets. You couldn't re-download. No web browsers, no right button click, and no resumes were available. So I didn't understand why a constantly on connection would turn off. So I downloaded the manual for the modem. I connected to the modems inside firmware, right, internal firmware, and I saw that the logins were all default. So I hacked into the modem legally to fix my own modem. And then it said that there was a parameter on the router at the cable company. So I connected to the cable company and saw that the logins were also default. And I checked out their specs, and there was something off. So I tried fixing it. It worked. I put it back how it was and called the cable company. I called customer service. Hey, hello, thanks for calling. It's like, yes, I'd like to speak to the plant engineer. It's called a cable plant. I'd like to speak to the engineer. And they said, sir, the engineer doesn't deal directly with customers. And I told them, okay, can you pass along this message? I hacked into the server, and I am turning it off in the next 60 minutes unless he calls me back. And I hung up. About 10 minutes later, the plant engineer gives me a call and says, hi, how are you doing? And I told him it was a Cisco router called the Universal Broadband Router, or UBR. So I just, without delay, I told him, you have a TTL, time to live, on the UBR that's off, and it's shutting off every 60 minutes. That should be 24 hours. Were you aware of this issue? And he said, yes, we are. Do you know how to fix it? I'm like, yeah. Are you going to be home? He said. I'm like, I never leave my home. And he was like, we'll be over in a little bit. And I said, okay, come on over. So he drove over with his main tech.
Wow.
We went all to my computer, which was a really big ATX case with like 8 fans in it, 4 hard drives, 2 CDRs, no DVDs yet, and it sounded like a B-52 on startup. So I switched the whole thing that needed 2 power supplies, wick, whack, whoa. And he said, okay, log in. I command line, you see this? Okay, change this file. And the modem is going to reset in 3, 2, 1. There it goes. If you change this, wait for it. It didn't do it. And he looked me square in the eye and said, do you know how to do this? I'm like, yes. Where'd you learn? And I told him, out on the street, because I had like a year and a half worth of college. And I dropped out of college to go to mechanic school. And I was working at a tire shop back then. And he said, would you like to do this? I'm like, I'd love to do this.
Yeah.
Would you like to get paid for it? I'm like, they pay for this? I'm like, yeah, they pay. And I was like, sure, how much? And he said, $12 an hour. Minimum wage was $3.85, about to be increased to 4.20. So that was 3 times
Do you
the
remember how
minimum
much you were
wage.
making at the time at the mechanic shop?
4.50 an hour.
So this was, I mean, this is a major raise.
Oh no, the tire shop closed and they fired me. This was about
Mm,
3 or 4 months after they fired me.
I
I was
see.
like, this was, and he said, and I was like, they pay people to log on. I do this for free anyway. I didn't even know you could get a job in this. And
Yeah.
that's how I became Puerto Rico's first broadband high-speed internet tech.
Wow.
And they said, what do you need? And I'm like, what do you mean, what do I need? It's like, do you need tools? I'm like, I need all the tools. And they said, do you need a truck? I'm like, yeah, best one you
Wow.
got. So they gave me a 1983 Mazda B2200. That was the crappiest truck I had ever driven. But with that crappy truck, I did about 800 installations in a year. We
Wow.
used to cram about 8 installs. I used to get inside a bucket. You've seen the trucks that go up with a little bucket truck
Yep.
and
Yep.
fix.
Yep. Yep.
I learned how to splice fiber optic cable. I don't know why they call it cable. I learned how to epoxy fiber optic together, configure bidirectional lasers. So fiber optics used to be one direction,
Mm,
but to have two-way data, you need lasers. It's called multiplexing. And I learned that expanded my knowledge exponentially. I was, wow, it was a
mm,
pure geekgasm. And I had a cable company's broadband with satellite connections, and we would get up on the roof of these large buildings to point satellite directions. Mind you, that plant engineer and I are still friends.
mm.
He's an engineer at a laboratory for Motorola, or whatever Motorola is called now. And we were chatting the other day, and I feel it's one of the happiest moments of my life when he said, "You were always such a brain." And I'm like, wow, this guy who was a role model for me. I wanted to be like him when I grew
Mm,
up, and he was like 26 and I was 19. So
mm,
he told me that he looked up to me back then because he couldn't figure out how I could disassemble stuff and put it back
mm,
together.
mhm,
So if there's such a thing as a mutant superpower, I guess analyzing systems
mm,
and then rebuilding them in a let I don't like to use the word sustainable, but a sustainable system is a system that can run identically forever, right?
mm,
So that I'll lay the foundation on that one. Reiteration is a system that changes every time the system cycles.
mm,
So if you have an infinitely reiterating system that is sustainable ad perpetuum, at infinity, then you have the perfect combination of system building. So after I was working for that company, and I had trained other techs already, and I said to myself, I want to go to law school.
mm.
I don't know why I said that to myself, but it worked out in the long run. It was there was a really bad hurricane. Well, there have been several bad hurricanes in Puerto Rico. But this was George's in '98. I was a freshman in college again because I dropped out, went to
Right.
mechanic school,
Right.
worked as a mechanic, and then re-enrolled in college as a criminology major in Pontifical Catholic University of Puerto Rico in
Mm,
Mayaguez, which is the western city where I grew up and went to college. And as a criminology major, I wanted to help. Well, I wanted to go to law school because I saw a lot of people around me that needed help filling out government forms for
mm,
FEMA, for government benefits. So while I was in school, I used to charge $20, which is a lot of money back then, for filling out the FAFSA application for the Department of Education to
mhm,
apply for student loans and for student aid.
mhm,
And I started filling out forms for other people, and I said to myself, okay, so I love speaking in public. I hate losing arguments, And I would love to be a litigator because I love picking intellectual fights with other people. And that's what I told myself. So I left the cable company, enrolled in law school. And when I got to law school, there were no computers. You had to, if you wanted casework, you had to print out every single case. And I was like, what the heck of inefficiency is this? I'm not carrying thousands of pages. I have PDFs that weigh nothing. And I have a pen drive. I was armed with a pen drive. So I would download all the PDFs, and I took my laptop to class. This was 2002, 2003. And whenever the professor would ask about a particular doctrine, all my PDFs were OCR'd, optical character recognition, and I could search the PDF for the answer. And that's how I became the fastest answering student in law school. and that gained me some measure of notoriety. So I signed up for work and study because money was kind of tight back then. But by then, my mom had passed away. So there was no plan B. It was arrive to law school, burn the ships, and survive as you could. So I would hang out at the computer laboratory. Yes, they still called it a laboratory. And the printer would conk out because everyone on the first week of class would print out thousands of cases.
Right.
Because if you print them out, you don't have to buy, the printed set of casework for the class. And the toner would run out, and there was no sort of server management. So I went to the administration and told them, hi, I'm getting paid to warm a chair through work and study. You seem to have an issue with your printers. And they said, do you know how to do this? I'm like, yeah. Do you want to get paid for it? I'm like, you get paid for this? And they said, yeah. I'm like, okay, sign me up. So I reconfigured the print server and established printing quotas that throttled the amount of pages each student with their student ID number could print. And then I found a barcode scanner that was left over from a POS. And that way, I told them to print a barcode on the physical ID, so people could scan in their student ID. All this was, ransacked out of spare computer parts. The scanner I got from a cafeteria POS, and we were running Windows NT back then.
Well, let me ask you, did the university agree to this? I mean, this is, for me, just thinking about now, if I went to a university and said, hey, you should implement this system, the expectation would be that they would say, thanks for the idea. Even, we're best case scenario, they'd say, thanks for the idea, but we don't have, and then the worst case scenario, they'd say, get out of here. So, but it sounded like you somehow were able to convince institutions, companies, et cetera, to do these things that you suggested, right?
Convince is a strong word. What I did is I built the infrastructure, configured everything, and then sold them on the results. So I configured my own NT server. I wired everything and then brought someone who called the shots to see how it worked after being built. And then gave them an option. You can continue to have crappy printers that conk out and cost thousands, or set up a printer queue administration through a server.
Yeah.
And they always sided with the already implemented idea, and the only person who could run it was me. So what I did is I taught other students to operate that network system I had built. The same thing happened with the campus-wide Wi-Fi. There was no Wi-Fi. No one took a laptop to class, so there was no need to connect to the interwebs. So I plugged a Wi-Fi access point and then started sharing the password with everyone. I set up an authentication server that used the student ID to log into the wireless network. More people started taking their laptop to class. And then the professor was like, this is starting to work out better. More people are coming to class. No YouTube. Well, YouTube was just barely starting. You could browse on eBay or maybe on Daily Motion. So no social networks. So everyone just chatted amongst each other with MSN Messenger.
Right.
So, and after the Wi-Fi was set up, I then went to the administration again and said, hey, wireless internet is a thing. How about we have a campus-wide internet? And they said again, do you know how to do this? I'm like, yeah. Would you like to do it? Yeah. And when they asked me if I wanted to get paid for it, the answer was through work study. They wouldn't. This was not. I was not on the university payroll.
Right.
It was either sitting at the library or developing different systems to expand the IT infrastructure.
I have to say that it's a beautiful lesson too in entrepreneurship. If maybe you didn't even realize it at the time, but maybe you did. You were building solutions that were going to solve a problem that existed, but you didn't ask for permission to build them. You just built them, you made sure they worked, and then you presented those solutions to the powers that be and said, look, here's this thing I've built. You can take it if you'd like, or not. You can stay as you are, but clearly the better option. And it's a really, I think, interesting lesson, especially to people who are building a company for the first time, especially a tech company, right? Because you can do that sort of relatively easily on your computer, or it's not building a brick and mortar business. You can do this on your own time to solve a problem that you're aware of, and then present it to your target client
with a minimal of capital. That's the whole issue.
Right, exactly.
Because back then I was a lonely student with no budget but a lot of free time. So I invested in skill building, which is something I still do. People ask me, the hardest question I ever have to answer is, what do you do? The answer is everything I can get my hands on. Fixing cars, fixing computers, configuring networks, brewing beer, baking bread, driving big rig trucks, taking stuff apart and putting it back together. My lifelong passion has been learning marketable skills, if you can call them marketable. But at the time, they're only marketable to me as part of that interest.
Right.
And break stuff up and ask for permission later has been my approach. I graduated from law school, took the bar exam. I was a teacher assistant for 4 professors. I was welcome decorated, and I published. I used to say it was the first bar review article on electronic notarizations, but I discovered a year ago that I was the second one because there was a prior article I hadn't tapped into that was about 2 or 3 years before mine about e-signatures. But in 2006, I wrote an article on how Puerto Rico has a civil law background, right? But it also has common law into it because of the U.S.'s relationship with Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is an unincorporated territory, so it's a mixture of common law and civil law. Civil law notaries require signatures and a certain protocol you have to follow when you notarize a document. And I said to myself, there has to be a better way. Biometric authentication, face recognition, encryption, algorithmic authentication of documents, because a scanned page was not considered a document back then. And I said to myself, it is identical. It's even better because it can't get wet and can't catch fire. The issue we have right now is laying the evidentiary foundations for document authentication. And I said to myself, companies do this already. eBay authenticates a transaction by assigning a hash code and encrypting it. Why can't we do the same thing with a notarization? But this was, 14 years before the pandemic made notarizing cool, e-notaries cool. But in any case, I wrote about it. And by the time I graduated, I said to myself, okay, it's time for a big law job. And I sent out 21 resumes, and none of them came back. No one wanted to hire a crazy tech dude because technology and the practice of law didn't get along. Email attachments weren't a thing. I mean, you sent out a Word document, which could be edited, and that didn't constitute evidence. E-discovery wasn't a thing yet. There was no need to scrounge hard drives for evidence or to conduct audit trails for emails. Emails lived in a server way beyond the long arm of the law, right? So I said to myself, okay, I am jobless. I can go back to being a mechanic, but this kind of sucks. I'll set up a brick and mortar office. That's the way, isn't it? That's what you're supposed to do right out of law school. And in the year I had a brick and mortar office, 3 clients walked in through the door. And then I spent 9 months without electricity between the power outages and the hurricanes and the electric company's lack of decent billing services. I spent 9 months charging my laptop off of my car and practicing remote law. It wasn't remote law, virtual practice back then, until one day this Australian dude posted on TripAdvisor, "Hi, my dad passed away in Puerto Rico. Does anyone know how you can start a probate proceeding?" And I'm like, I know this one. It's like, "Hi, how's it going? I'm a lawyer. What do you need?" And he said, "Well, my dad moved to Puerto Rico. He was diagnosed with cancer and passed away. We need to conduct an intestate probate estate division over there. Do you know a lawyer who can do that?" I'm like, "Yes, I definitely do know a lawyer. I am the lawyer." Okay, how do I get him to sign my engagement letter? Geez, crap, I can scan you the document. You can sign it, and you can either postal mail it back from Australia to Puerto Rico, and that's going to take forever, or you can scan it and send it to me. And he did scan it, and he did send it back to me. And I took that engagement letter, which I executed over the interwebs, and the next problem was receiving money. You could Western Union money, but it was expensive and slow. And Puerto Rico is prime ground for source of funding issues because it is a prime jurisdiction for drug-related money laundering. So if you sent the check back then to Puerto Rico and deposited, it would take 21 days for the money to clear. So I told him, "How about you PayPal me the money?" And he said, "Do you mean like eBay?" I'm like, "Exactly like eBay." And he PayPal'd me the money. And that's how my virtual law firm started.
Wow.
Someone that needed legal work in Puerto Rico, and I was in Puerto Rico, but it was inverted. I was practicing remotely inverse.
Right. To get clients from around the world.
Exactly.
Actually, this is a really great opportunity to pause just to give a quick thank you to the second sponsor of the show, but also that works, as a company that works remotely and helps entrepreneurs from all over the world to come to the U.S., whether Puerto Rico or the contiguous states, et cetera. So just want to say thank you to Journey Business Plan. So Journey, for those of you who don't know, if you're practicing immigration law and you work with E2s, EB2 NIWs, EB5s, et cetera, Journey is a leading provider of business plans for immigration law firms. And they partner with immigration firms and global mobility professionals, and they create business plans. I mean, they help them craft the business plans alongside those E2, EB2, NIW, EB5, et cetera, cases. So wherever your clients are, if you're a law firm with US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, anywhere around the world, if they're coming into the US or Canada, we work with Canadian immigration lawyers too, and have some offices around the world. Journey is an awesome company. So I've known them actually for a number of years. I'm so grateful that they're a sponsor and support this show. They're a really great team. Like the first sponsor, they also create a ton of webinars and a lot of content for the immigration law industry. So I'm grateful to have awesome sponsors to support this show and make these conversations possible. So for any lawyers or immigration lawyers out there that need business plans for immigration purposes, check them out. The website is joorney.com. That's journey.com to see samples of their work. So thank you to Journey. And yeah, Christian, I wanted to kind of use that segue just because, from a remote work perspective, now we take this for granted. And, we really kind of, yes, COVID accelerated it. It was already happening. But back then, what you're talking about is there was no law pay. There was no, there were no tools really of the trade to enable easy online practice, but you sort of hacked it together, if you will.
I hashed it all together. I Now that you mentioned Journey, it's one of my favorite services, especially for business plans.
Mm,
And you also mentioned DocketWise. Back when it was called BorderWise, I was a
mm,
beta tester for them. So whenever I come across a solution for a problem, I test it out as best as I can. I was a beta tester before it was PayPal. It was X.com to
hmm
provide payments over the interwebs. That was one way, but the money landed in PayPal and you couldn't get it out. You couldn't ACH transfer it to an account in Puerto Rico. So what I did is I started opening up virtual addresses in the States, virtual and bank accounts in the States. So I would transfer money to those bank accounts and then ship over a debit card to Puerto Rico and use those funds in Puerto Rico without actually having to transfer funds to Puerto Rico. That solved the payment issue somewhat. But remember that credit card processors require physical spaces. They don't like it when you're too virtual. It's part of their know your business, know your client qualifications. But in any case, I started testing out different law practice management softwares. My favorite for a long time was Basecamp. Basecamp is a project management tool, which I still love, made by 37 Signals. But it allowed me to visually organize steps in the process for litigation. I pigeonholed into family and domestic relations for stateside clients who needed legal work in Puerto Rico, commercial transactions between U.S. distributors and U.S. Service providers that provided services in Puerto Rico, and representing non-resident clients from the U.S. to Puerto Rico. And my business expanded really well. Mind you, I took the oath in 2007. So by 2008, all hell had broken loose,
Right.
and banking and securities litigation became a thing. So I started suing local banks to give their monies back. And they hated me for it, but banks don't like to fork over money. But my
Right.
clients definitely loved it. Estate divisions, complex estate divisions and probate. And I specialized in a particular niche, which is Parental Kidnapping Prevention Act. If you travel with a minor to Puerto Rico without parents' stateside permission, all hell breaks loose.
Good to
And
know.
Puerto Rico's territorial relationship with the U.S. makes it very hard to get that minor back to the U.S.
Wow.
So, and because I love problem solving, I worked my butt off getting kids back into their parents' arms, which was, it was emotionally challenging, but very rewarding when it did work. And my office was paperless from inception. Instead of completing a physical form, an intake form, it was a web form, a crappy, bad-looking, really crappily locally hosted form, but a web form nonetheless, which connected to a spreadsheet. It was a Lotus 123 spreadsheet that then was a Microsoft Office Excel sheet. But I could search through my client database for conflict checking with a right button click. So whenever someone needed last minute work, I could deliver on high stress last minute. And then I did something no one had ever thought of: flat fees for family law cases. Each motion was $75. Filing a complaint or a divorce, a lawsuit, was $150, right? And you could budget your whole family law matter in a better way. I started reading on paperless management, remote management, and there weren't any ebooks, so you had to go to the physical library. And what I
Right.
did is, if I really liked the book, I bought the book, went to Office Max to cut off the spine, and then scanned the whole thing into a PDF. No tablets, so it was me with my laptop, and I would read through and scroll through, but all my library was in my pen drive or my hard drive. Anyway, I grew my law firm from 2007 through to 2015, and then the Puerto Rican economy took a downturn. I started I started brewing beer in Puerto Rico as a home
I love
brewer.
that. I love that.
I was one of Puerto Rico's first 9 home brewers, and it wasn't legal. Shh. I was illegally brewing home beer, but not for commercial purposes. My friends and I drank all of it.
Sure, sure.
So I started helping business startups for brew pubs and microbreweries, and hit it really hard on the homebrew scene. So Denver hosts the Great American Beer Festival once a year. And it seemed like a pilgrimage, right? Where all
Hmm.
beer brewers and home brewers convene to try the new stuff. And by 2012, I started traveling once a year to Denver. 2012 was for a weekend. 2013, it was for a week. By 2015, I stayed there about a month and then asked my fiance, who's my wife now, do you want to move to Denver? And she said, yeah. And we sold all our crap, packed our 2 cats in 2 suitcases, and went off to Denver to rent a space through Airbnb, which was barely starting back then. And just sight unseen, we signed the lease agreement in a brew pub, obviously, and then we were there. So what do I do now? My first language is Spanish. I'll try immigration in 2015.
Hmm.
And then 2016 happened.
Hmm.
And it became much more complicated to practice immigration because of the administration change. But my office grew, and I said to myself, okay, it's time for brick and mortar office. It's the natural progression after all. And we grew from a virtual firm to a brick and mortar firm. By 2020, we had 4 attorneys, 15 support staff, and I absolutely hated every second of it because it consumed all of my creativity. The files were still paperless. I don't know why I had to physically meet in person. Well, I do now, because to hire a lawyer, you have to build trust. And building trust online takes longer.
Sure.
And inspiring trust to Hispanic clients, which I catered mostly, was even harder because immigration is rife with scams.
Right.
And these internet scams are out there. So convincing someone to send me monies over the interwebs was a little harder. But I was there, and I started traveling. I started traveling intensely by 2019. I visited 14 countries in 2019. So as the business was running and I was the conductor, I managed my firm remotely. And all the systems that I had built for my law practice, the standard operating procedures, worked better when I wasn't there. Also, the more time I traveled, the better I dealt with as a lawyer.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that was? I mean, as somebody who's a managing attorney of a firm, obviously you have your staff, and they're doing work. You're out there around the world. Why do you think that it was more effective or more efficient when you weren't there?
There's a saying in Puerto Rican Spanish, it's probably regular Spanish, that I'm going to try to translate it, but I'm going to murder it along the way. It's who stirs the pot can't see what they're stirring. Quien mueve la olla no ve lo que se cocina, right? So I was in the pot whenever I walked through that threshold of my office that had the big sign and the billboard, and my mug was plastered everywhere. There was a paradigm change. You know how you as an entrepreneur wear different hats? Well, my creative hat was left outside of the door. I rode a KLR motorcycle from Denver to California, all through Utah and Arizona and New Mexico. And while I was riding, in the back of my mind, I was thinking of all the cool stuff I could develop to remotely manage my law firm But while I was in the actual building,
Right.
I couldn't think of any of that. I
Hmm.
visually reacted to what was there. It
Hmm.
was a haptic feedback, but it was a negative feedback loop. And instead of tinkering to make it sustainable, I would reiterate every process. And with every reiteration, I couldn't let the system run on its own to see what the results were. So I couldn't leave it alone. I was constantly changing everything because I was there. Whereas when I was outside of the law firm, I could step outside of the box and see how it was working as a user. And that's the important part.
Yeah.
Administrator and user don't see the same thing. I could analyze the system from the outside, see how I could make it better, and integrate other tools to make the system better. Video chat, teleconferencing, voice over IP, email and SMS drips. These were all things that while I was an operator, I was unable to implement. And I couldn't try new stuff out. Like, that's when the automation building began. Why do I have to send an invoice? I have to generate the invoice, print the invoice, package the invoice, lick the envelope, fold the envelope, go to the post office, put it in the little box and pray to the USPS God for it to be delivered. And that invoice is coming back in my pre-packaged, pre-addressed, pre-stamped envelope with a little check that now I have to unseal the envelope, take the check, and take it to the bank. When someone could simply take a picture of the check and I could remotely deposit it from anywhere. That's when I said to myself many things, but I started looking for other places to live. I wanted to step outside of the United States. I was fed up with my law firm. I was fed up with everything. And I said to myself, let's move to another country, which we had said before by moving to the States.
Right.
But this time it was like, okay, let's go back to basics. I'm much more creative remotely. I'm going to leave placeholders in the States and then moved to Costa Rica. And that's when it became really cool, which is we sold all our stuff in Colorado, packed our 2 cats and our 2 suitcases and moved to Costa Rica. And we started over again. And I said to myself, okay, I've done this before. I have the know-how. You know the intro of the $6 Million Man? I said, we have the technology. We can build a better law firm. And that's what I did. Went fully paperless. I started automating everything I could. I took 18 years worth of KPI, standard operating procedures, and plugged them all into several LLMs. I told ChatGPT, analyze this, make it better, reiterate infinitely. I need to make this as efficient and with the least amount of interaction, human interaction, because humans are fallible. If you give me a task, if you give me one task, it might come out perfectly. If you give me 10 tasks, one of them is not going to be perfect. Hopefully, that's a 90% efficiency. And humans don't operate at a 90% efficiency, right? I mean, we wish. But unless you have those 10,000 hours of practice under your belt, you're gonna muck it up a few times. How can I train someone to do this perfectly every single time? You build a manual with a flow chart that says, if this, then that. That was one of the best offers I ever tried, which is if this, then that. And I started looking for API integrations. And that's when I took all of my standard operating procedures, I disbanded the whole team, said goodbye to everyone, and saved a lot of payroll and payroll taxes along the way. I strategically placed all my billing in the least tax exposure places I could and removed myself from the equation. If you start the client journey and you continue down a gamified process, you end up with a immigration form. Or I end up with a court calendar that's been pre-populated by the client to begin with. and by the client's tools that they interact. I use off-the-shelf tools like Zapier, Make, AppyPie. I use DocketWise, and DocketWise's awesome API to produce the end result of what I was doing anyway. But instead of ingressing the info directly on their forms, I create my own conversational forms that take my clients on a single question course to share with me the info in the simplest languaging possible. What is your name? I only want their name. I don't want a web form that has 30 blocks into it. I want one question. And if you don't click the yes and the name is right, you don't get to the second question. Because one of my pain points was low-tech clients. I specialized in asylum defense for Central Americans in the US, right? The uneducated people with very low tech levels, which is, and mostly from an agricultural background. Once I asked a client to come into my office, and I told him he had to take the elevator. After an hour that he missed his appointment, I called him and I asked him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in the elevator." And I asked him, "Have you pushed the button that has a 3 on it?"
Wow.
And he asked me, "What does a 3 look like?" And I was like, oh no, my bad. He was a horse farmer from Guatemala, displaced by a mining company. So I wanted to Google Meet and Zoom with my clients, but they barely had phone skills. So I started looking for non-app applications, web-hosted, self-hosted forms, and integrating all of those. You don't need any software to download. It'll ask you one question at a time, and it'll ask you the simple question in whatever language you want. I don't have to translate the whole form. I only have to translate one question at a time. And when you click submit, if everything's fine, the information from Gravity Forms or WordPress forms or WP forms is propagated through an API through Zapier, Maker, AppyPie into DocketWise. DocketWise, I review the info, I screen share with them on their cell phone, ask them about the particulars of their application, and that meeting was scheduled through an online scheduler. We only meet over the interwebs if you have scheduled a consultation. I only have to be presentable at the time of the scheduled consultation.
Right.
The same thing happened with appearances in court, in immigration court. As I represented detained individuals, all the hearings were through WebEx anyway. I didn't have to be in the office to do WebEx as long as the broadband was fast enough. I could Starlink into it. I could fiber optic my way into court. And I could be in different state courts, different immigration courts on the same day without having to have a private plane, which I would love and probably hate at the same time. So I could right button click my appearance into court, and that allowed me to unplug from the litigation fray and recharge by. Now I spend my afternoons, we have a farm. We rescue donkeys. We have goats and we plant corn. And I spend my time talking to 100-year-old locals and ask them how the heck they've made it so far. And I'm focused now on building a better me, a more healthy me, emotionally and physically, and I invest my time learning new skills like making the perfect handmade tortilla. I simply palm my way. I asked this very nice lady, it's like, "Hi lady, there was no corn in Puerto Rico when I grew up, but there's corn here. Can you teach me about corn?" And she taught me about 5 different types of corn, about 10 different corn recipes, how to ferment corn, boil corn with ashes, how to grind corn with a metate, which is a hand roll thingy that you have to leave most of your knuckles if you don't know how to do it well. And that's how I spend my time now, instead of obsessing on how to make money in a law firm in a little square building.
So let me ask you this: Do you? First of all, I wanted to say here that Ariana Gonzalez said that your Spanish was correct in your with the if you're stirring the pot, you don't see what you're cooking. So
Uh-huh.
thank you, thank you, Ariana. Do you think? And I want to, by the way, I'm going to ask this question. Then I want to get to how you then took a step back and looked at all of the systems that you've built and said, this should be a business. I want to help other people because I want to get to Virtualaw. What is it, and what do you do for other immigration lawyers or other lawyers? Do you think, before we get to that though, do you think that having created all this efficiency and sort of automated so much of your work, do you think that's given you this freedom, this free time to be able to spend outdoors, spend time outdoors, talk to elderly in your area and learn about tortillas, etc.? Like, do you think there's a correlation between those two things?
Absolutely. There is an underlying direct connection with my improvement in my quality of life because I went to law school and I practiced law to improve both my life and the people I try to help. But the practice of law, the management of a law practice, and the actual lawyering are three very different hats to wear. Very different hats. And the more time I spent on administrative tasks, the less time I had to actually lawyer, which is taking a subset of data, applying statutory guidelines and exceptions, and analyzing a complex matrix of regulations, statutes, case law, regulation, and all the stuff that lies under it. But my mental sub-processes work much better when I am involuntarily lawyering. If I need to take some time off, I'll go do the dishes or take a shower. Because when I stop visually inputting data, I stop reading or analyzing or looking at graphs, my subconscious system starts mulling over possibilities involuntarily. And it's an exercise. The more you do it, the more you learn how to tap into it. Mm-hmm. For example, I suck at math and calculations, but I am very good at picking up visual patterns and finding anomalies on a spreadsheet. I didn't know how to do that, and the less I mulled over the invoicing, the billing, the time tracking, the document generation, 100% of my emails are already pre-canned. 100% of my filings are already pre-canned. The 10% additional are the client particulars. The who, the what, and the where. The how is emotion. The how is an estate plan. The how is a lawsuit filing. The how is just a form. It's just another PDF that can be assembled, not drafted. I don't need to draft unless it is a novel idea that has never been approached before. Mm-hmm. And that's when creativity takes over. How do I manage that creativity? I go out for a walk and walk the donkey. I go out for a horse ride. I'm not thinking about the case, but at some point, inspiration will smack me and say, wait, you could 1331 that into that. Holy crap, that's a great idea. And as I automated everything, I became better at lawyering. First, I started taking care of myself. Lawyers are terrible at taking care of themselves. Right. We don't exercise. We love whiskey. I lost 129 pounds. I used to weigh 330 pounds. Amazing. I used to drink all the stuff I shouldn't drink. I barely exercised, and I used to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and none of those helped my lawyering because the more I lawyered, the worse I felt. So the more I used emotional crutches and chemical crutches too. And it was unsustainable, so I was unhappy. I was sick and tired, literally, on both. And the less time I spent in the law firm, in my firm, the better I felt. So I said to myself, I can't lawyer if I feel like crap. I can't lawyer if I don't exercise. I hate exercising, by the way, because it's work. I mean, you get sweaty, it hurts, it's a pain in the butt, but most normal people don't enjoy the actual exercise, or at least I hope they don't, unless they're masochists, and I've met a lot of masochists. But I felt great after the exercise.
Right.
And I started taking care of what I ate. And eating well is very boring. I owned a pizza shop for 2 years before law school. That's another story.
Wow.
That was my first official second official enterprise. But yeah, I love pizza, but pizza isn't exactly great for you. No matter how much you exercise, you can't walk yourself out of 8 slices. But spending time making pizza for other people fills up my emotional tank of gratitude. And that's where my lawyering comes in. Because if I don't fill up the gratitude tank, it runs out and I start hating other people, the job, my own existence, and I act up on all of the nasty stuff that all that caters. When I sold everything, I cut off all the 8 streaming services I had, and thankfully I don't pay for subscriptions anymore. I have a lot of free time. Now I read books and watch the rain, and it sounds delightfully boring. But what I do now is I study ancient ways for agriculture, traditional agriculture. So what I did is I separated myself from the fray, removed myself from the equation, and the emails get answered automatically. I answer emails twice a day, once in the morning and once before I leave. Everything has already been written already, and it's right button clicked through text expander or through email snippets or pre-canned email drip sequences. I pipe file document requests, and pipe file can send 20 reminders through text message and through email without me having to remind clients. And it creates an audit trail for all the times my system has asked for these. And when the client says that they haven't received my request, I simply screenshot all the times they've received a reminder. That solved a lot of issues. I don't have to hound the clients for payments. I don't have to hound the clients for documents, and all they need to do is take a picture of them with their iPhone, convert it into a PDF, and upload it securely. That's it. My LLM integrations that I build for attorneys now, because attorneys suck at customer service. We went to law school. We didn't go to marketing school. Relaying simple ideas in simple language is beyond us, because we went to hard language school. We learned Latin, rebus sextantibus, which means nothing to a normal person. So part of my LLM instructions is write in simple human-like language. Use third grade language to explain this like if I was a child. I'd rather err on the simple side because simple language cannot be misconstrued.
Worst case scenario, they ask for more information. Whereas if you confuse them, then you have to. It's a more uncomfortable situation.
You can tone up the complicated language. You can't tone it down further. Yeah,
exactly. So all of this culminated into, I guess, you starting this business. Talk to me a little bit about what is Virtualaw, and sort of, what do you do? How are you working with other firms to help them from a text perspective?
So I ask attorneys to meet with me. We have a teleconference, and I ask them all the questions about how they run their law firm. Then I tell them to close their eyes and imagine I am a tech genie and they are going to rub the lamp. They tell me what they would like, what issues they're having, and I bounce off ideas on possible issues I've had before, like managing remote teams, getting clients to pay their bills, assembling documents, sharing files over the internet through cloud services. And after that initial interview, where we cover 4 main topics: client intake and onboarding, invoicing, time tracking, and billing, document management and automation, which is document building for different practices, and social media management, just because social media is its own separate animal. And I asked them to put those in order and prioritize them. And we build together a blueprint, an automation blueprint, which is a step-by-step analysis. It's an audit of what it is they're doing, how I think, or how my custom GPTs think we could improve on those. And we try to build a train of different cars where they're all connected from initial contact to disengagement. Everything along the railroad conducted with a minimum of attorney intervention. So I analyze how they gather their clients' data. Is it a web form? Is it a WhatsApp message? Is it an SMS text message? Is it a chat bot? Do they come to the office and fill out a little paper, right? What happens to the paper after that? Does it get scanned? Can you OCR the scan? Can you substitute it for a tablet? If it's a tablet, how do we connect that info to your law practice management software, to your CRM? How do you propagate the information without human intervention between A to B down over to Z? Z is the thank you, your case is done. And if your case is ongoing, you go back to update, inform, project management.
Right. So got it. You're working with the law firm. You are understanding their processes and their pain points, and then it sounds like you are recommending different tools. Do you then go in and implement those tools? I mean, do you come in as somebody who goes into sets accounts up for them, connects everything through Zapier or otherwise, and then train them? I mean, is that sort of how the business model works?
Yes, that is exactly how it works. After we create that audit, that automation blueprint, I discuss our findings and determine whether they want to change anything, right? And we try to build it. Then I offer a budget, 1 year, right? Depending on what time frame they would like to implement these. If it's compressed time frame, then I have a team of web developers, API developers as well, mostly on WordPress. I love WordPress because you can mix and match plugins. That's but not everything runs on WordPress. But what we do then is I build a proposal on how we can implement and execute these over the proposed timeline, and provide a detailed budget of how much usage fees, subscription fees, and our fee to implement this. With that blueprint, they can take that blueprint to another developer, an in-house developer, or they can ask us for a recommendation for a developer who can execute all those recommendations. So based on my experience as a system builder and as an attorney, I analyze my experience having tested all sorts of systems in both my law firm and as a law firm consultant, because as I practice in Puerto Rico, other law firms in Puerto Rico would hire me to do tech consulting for complex litigation, class action suits, and managing large quantities of evidence discovery. Like, for example, a medical malpractice case where I had to sit and scan about 10,000 pages worth of medical records. But once the banker's boxes were scanned, you could right button click and find the page you were looking for, because everything was OCR'd and databased. Instant access to the same information without having to flip through pages. And as I learned all those skills, now I apply those to solo practitioners, small firms, medium firms, large firms. The amount of people in the firm to me is irrelevant, because the ingress, management, wrangling, analysis, and end result are all identical within law firms. They all require an initial uptake of information. They all require databasing and accessing that information in a systemized, organized manner. And the processes that take that from point A to point Z are all interconnected through different independent systems. So I'll look at what the underlying architecture of the system is, apply the most efficient and most cost-saving alternatives to those, because I love systems that don't implement a growth tax, that you can infinitely scale your law firm without additional human interaction unless you prefer it that way. Some people like managing large teams. I like managing small, efficient teams. I like fewer people, because transmitting an idea to another human requires a relationship building. And I am good at building relationships where I don't have to explain the whole thing. But if I do, there's a manual for that explains how I want the end result. And at the end, we take some time to implement the whole thing and then establish a contract for maintenance to make sure that the train keeps running down the railroad.
What's the just for listeners and people who are watching, and for myself as well, what's the charge? Like, what's the pricing model for something like this? You go to a law firm, they ask for, you talk to them, you do your intake, you give them an analysis and a recommendation of what they can automate. How do you then charge? I mean, is it like a monthly fee or is there a one-time project installation and then you have this follow-on support? Like, how does this work for law firms?
The answer is every single way. It's as
Right.
flexible and as
Sure.
complicated as it can be. The initial discovery meeting is $249. It is a nominal fee because no-shows decrease significantly when you charge an upfront fee. And that is all across the board, even for attorneys. I used to offer a free discovery meeting, but my no-show rate skyrocketed. And I said to myself, why would attorneys no-show? Because they're also very busy.
Right.
But if they've paid a little for it, then they make it to the meeting no matter what. And my meetings are always refundable. If you're not happy with it, I'm not going to keep your money. I want this to be a fruitful relationship, not a penalty one, not a penalized one, but an initial discovery meeting, a few more subsequent meetings for the blueprint. For a solo practitioner, it's usually around $3,000 to $4,000 ballpark, depending on the size of their team. I usually adjust the fees depending on the scope of the project, because if someone tells me to build them a skyscraper and someone asks me to build them a 2-room home, the concrete is mixed more or less the same way, but the amount of concrete varies significantly.
Right.
So what I do as part of that discovery meeting is I gauge how organized they are. For example, you'd be surprised, but most of my recent consultations, my recent discovery meetings, are attorneys who don't have a CRM. And for me, that is unthinkable. But it's also very logical. Most attorneys have not dealt with technology to know what a CRM is and what the benefits are of having instant access organized in a large database of everyone you've ever come across. And everyone I've ever come across, I know because I've been saving all the receipts for everything I've bought since 1998, and they're all scanned and propagated over many hard drives and many cloud services. So if you ask me what I was doing on April 4th, 2001, I can answer because all my calendar is there. I have an audit trail, but it's harder. If you don't know something exists, you can't consider it a tool.
Of course.
And if most attorneys haven't had the time, the opportunity, the time to study that these things are out there. So what I do is I screen share and show them how I do it. And most of the reactions I receive from attorneys are like, oh my God, I didn't know. For example, this is just a simple automation. I have an email filter, right? I have a Gmail filter that whenever someone sends an email from a certain account, which is my web form, it flags it as potential clients. There's a folder, my potential client folder, will shoot off a Zapier automation that creates an onboarding reply automatically and creates a draft in that email folder. So answering emails for me is reviewing that the actual email draft is correct and clicking send. So I can receive 100 emails in a day, 500 emails in a day, but they've all been pre-written before based on instructions that I have provided on what info I need. I've pre-qualified their tone, their language, their phrasing, and their pre-qualifications to pre-qualify them as a potential client. And if they're not, the LLM is instructed, the custom GPT is instructed to ask them to book a meeting, a discovery meeting with the client using a link. So if I can answer the question of whether or not I can represent them for immigration, for Puerto Rico litigation, for business, and pretty much everything else, it's already been answered. The less time I spend thinking of potential replies, the more time I have to actually be creative and solve real issues.
Which is the whole purpose of technology. And of course, that's always the pitch, but a lot of firms look at it a different way. They say, well, I can't envision a place where I'm spending less time on work. All I'm envisioning is the additional time it'll take me to implement this software. So it's really nice that you're able to show them, what it looks like when it's already implemented, because then they can start to envision what that practice could look like once these tools are already in place, and then understand, okay, I actually do get my time back. I do get the flexibility, freedom, et cetera, to spend more time on client calls, to farm, whatever it is you need to do. I wanted to, as we wrap up, the last question I have for you with respect to Virtualaw is, I guess your target clients are immigration lawyers, as far as people, in this network who watch this show, or other lawyers. Where are you going forward with this? I mean, you've just launched your business kind of recently, within the year, but the business within the past year is based on experience over the last 30. Right. So this is not a new concept. It's just a new organization of your knowledge and expertise. What are you looking forward to with Virtualaw? Growing it? Are you looking to, build products? I mean, what are some of your thoughts on that?
For now, I'd love to take a nap. I'm kidding. I want Virtualaw to be the world's largest virtual law firm. I want it to be a community of attorneys everywhere who use the technology tools built through that type of automation so they can only focus on lawyering. And I know that sounds like all law practice management softwares have tried that before, right? But what I want to do is I want to standardize all across the board and streamline the interaction that a client requires to either virtually or physically meet with an attorney. Attorneys, we only do three things. We provide information to take a decision, right? We enable clients to decide by interpreting information, right? Complex systems, and simplifying the options. We distill info down. We produce documents. This is the second thing we do. We draft contracts, estate plans, motions, complaints, filings, or forms, mostly across the board. Or we have access to exclusive forums. These are administrative, judicial forums. Or we appear on someone's behalf. Transactionally, we conduct transactions on behalf of someone else. All these can be integrated into a single platform that allows 100% of the clients to find someone who can do that on their behalf, or educate clients that whatever they're doing has help available, right? I know it sounds corny to be an all-encompassing, and I'm not a fan of monopolies, but hiring a lawyer is a pain in the ass. I've hired many lawyers across my life, and we all make it so hard for someone to hire. How much do you charge? Well, it depends. What can you do for me? It also depends. I don't know even what to ask. I just want to speak to someone. For example, in the olden days, to notarize a signature, which is having another dude look at you signing a paper, you needed to wear clothing, get in a car or in a train or in a truck or in an airplane, go to that dude with the paper and sign the paper there. I love forms that say, don't sign yet, right? But that's the whole point. You need to sign it. Now you can sign it and have the dude look at you over the interwebs. Why are brick and mortar offices still a thing when all we do is sell information? And that information, that access on someone's behalf, can be conducted 100% remotely, instantly, at any time, from any place, in any measure. We still have to Google 20 different attorneys and go through 100 different websites and check their Avo ratings or their Google profiles. Ideally, every law firm should be infinitely databased in a single point of streamlined contact in every language, in every place, right? Because the onboarding should be identical. The end result should be identical. And the payment processing should be identical as well, because the same card you're going to swipe at the law firm is the same card you can remotely plug into the web form and pay online. But I know it's going to take, hopefully not another pandemic, but it's going to take a long time before attorneys are on board on making their lives easier through technology, because we're very risk adverse. I'll give you a really quick example. The other day on a discussion online on Facebook, which I spend too much time, more time than I should on Facebook, arguing with strangers, which is my second favorite pastime, right? Someone commented on my pre-qualification analysis for clients through ChatGPT, through OpenAI's API, right? Says you need to require client authorization before you record their calls. And I told them, but if someone calls me through Google Local Services ads, they've already relinquished to a third party that portion of privacy. And Google Local Services ads records all of the calls and transcribes them. They do it on the back end, and the end user licensing agreement says they do. Why should law practitioners be required to have a higher standard of an already approved standard for marketing? The answer is we love making things harder for ourselves through endless regulation. I'd like to cut the red tape and make the process of hiring a lawyer and finding legal help easier. And when you make things easier, you make them cheaper.
And more accessible.
The answer to the access to justice issue is make it simple and cheap. Don't overcomplicate things, but instead of drafting a 2-page agreement, we get paid more by drafting a 60-page agreement.
Right.
It incentivizes inefficiency. And please don't ask me about the billable hour. That is the most inefficient. It's like, I get paid more to take longer. You should be paying more to do it faster. That's what efficiency is. In engineering, an efficient system is one that requires less resources.
Right.
Not 3 associates, 2 senior paralegals, and 4 named partners to solve one issue that can be right button clicked and sent as an attachment.
Agreed. And you know what? I think that is where at least the immigration space is going, given that it is, it tends to be flat fee based. And it's interesting when I came into this space and started building out my company, it felt that immigration technology was there, but it wasn't very marketed. It wasn't very public, and certainly not as popular as it is now. And it has accelerated greatly in terms of popularity, which I love to see. And I used to think that immigration was a laggard industry or vertical in legal tech, and actually I think it's more of a leader now, because I think, given to your point, the desire for greater efficiency, given the cost structure, given the flat fee based model, we have a greater incentive as an industry to use tech and make it implemented across the board than others. Christian, this was really wonderful. I've learned so much, and it's really interesting. So folks can find you at virtua.law, virtua.law. I guess they can connect with you on social media as well, LinkedIn and other places. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, and for doing what you're doing. I think it's really interesting. Products are great. I run a tech company, so of course I'm biased, but I think it makes a ton of sense for there to be this middle layer, if you will, of experts like you who know the products that are out there in the market and who know the product, the pain points that the clients experience, and can come in and use what's out there to solve those pain points. So good luck with the business, and excited to see where it continues to grow. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Take care, Roman, and hope to see you in Costa Rica with a couple of donkeys so you can try out my tortillas.
Oh my God. I've never been to Costa Rica, and I'm dying to go, so I may hold you to that. So appreciate that.
Sweet. Take care.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for what an amazing conversation, for being here, for listening to this. Really interesting. It's wonderful to hear stories of lawyers who are tinkerers, who really learn on their own, and sort of their entrepreneurship comes not from a desire to just start a business, quote unquote, but to actually build something out of interest. So I want to say thank you again to DocketWise, the main sponsor of this episode. We talked about them a few times, but for any immigration lawyers who don't know, DocketWise, they are an all-in-one immigration case management platform. They have best-in-class forums, really customizable questionnaires, industry-leading APIs, like Christian mentioned, that can plug into different other tools that gather information, analyze information, visualize information, etc. DocketWise makes it really easy to do that. They put a lot of resources into content creation for the industry. So again, investing into ebooks, blogs, courses, webinars, etc. They support this show, and I'm really appreciative of it. So if you're interested in learning more about DocketWise, whether you're interested in them right now, or maybe you just want to learn more about them in case you ever want to switch case management systems, check them out. There's a link in the show notes, or visit them at docketwise.com and tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So with that, thank you, everybody. We are probably off next week since it's the Friday after Thanksgiving. It's Black Friday. But in the meantime, have a great weekend. See you on the next episode, and stay safe out there. Peace out.